Hello, and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Mark Gallivan, a former AVS student, a graduate, and a current staff member at the school. This is episode 21 of the Alpine Valley School podcast. You can find show notes for this episode at alpinevalleyschool.com/podcast/EP21 for episode 21. We're going to kick off today's show with a listener question. Someone wrote in asking to remain anonymous with the following question. Hi, Mark. Thanks for doing this podcast. I really get a lot out of it. My question is about your last episode with Jim Rietmulder. He said that at his school, staff members feel a duty to supervise, but that this isn't the case at other schools. Are kids at Alpine Valley School left completely unsupervised? Are there no situations where a staff member would intervene? I look forward to hearing your perspective. This is a great question, and it's actually one I received from several sources about the last episode, so I'm grateful for the opportunity to clarify. Thank you very much for writing in. The simple answer is yes. Kids at Alpine Valley School are supervised. In fact, in our staff handbook, which is a document that all staff members basically read and understand before they become staff at the school, we have the following phrase. All staff members will periodically walk around the building and grounds to ensure all is well. So kids at our school are supervised. We do walk around all the time. We as staff members have a situational awareness of what's happening around us and kind of where all the kids are and what's happening. The question is about really whether we intervene. And there are times when we intervene and there are times when we don't. And for me, as the newest staff member at the school, this was actually a point that I had a lot of confusion about when I started. And to some extent, there's a personal discretion element. And to some extent, there isn't. So let me clarify. If there is a safety issue of any kind, we as staff are going to intervene. Depending on what is happening and how great the danger is potentially to student, self, or others, we will step in, take control of the situation, and stop what's happening. Issues surrounding harassment, bullying, interpersonal relationships that are not going well kind of depend on the situation. Now, will it get written up by somebody? Absolutely. If I, as a staff member, see somebody being rude to somebody else or harassing them, and it doesn't seem like that person is going to write it up, then you can bet I absolutely will. In other situations, depending on the nature of what's unfolding, we may, as staff, encourage the kids to use the systems at school, to use the Judicial Committee. I, as a staff member, would advise that student to use their rights, and depending on the situation, would maybe do that myself. So let me give you an example. If I were to walk outside and see one of the students with a stick spinning in circles and getting dangerously close to another student with that stick, I would intervene. I would tell them to stop. I would approach the situation and put a stop to it before anybody got hit with a stick. But if I were to walk outside and see two students engaged in maybe a heated but not physical kind of interaction, I might be aware of that situation, stay kind of nearby, and see how it plays out, because we really do feel like there's value in letting students express themselves and work through difficult interactions as long as it feels like everybody is going to walk away from that situation and be okay. So what I can tell you is that kids will be safe, but they may not always be comfortable, because there are situations where we want them to be able to maybe learn a difficult lesson about interacting with other people, or about the consequences of their action. If they say, leave out a big mess, I may not always remind them to clean it up. I may just write it up, and they're going to have to go through the judicial system and be accountable for their actions, which is a learning and growing experience. But the bottom line is we do feel a duty to supervise, to be aware of what's going on, and if there is something that might threaten the safety of an individual, the building, or any of that, we would step in. But if it's a situation where it might not be comfortable, but everybody's safe, we might just let it play out and see how it goes. Because really, that's how we grow. Those are experiences we're going to have as adults, and kids are going to have those experiences too. And we want them to be able to learn effective ways of communicating and expressing themselves and dealing with those difficulties while they're still young and in a safe place. So thanks for the question. Really appreciate the opportunity to address that question. Safety at school is something that I think is on everyone's minds right now, given recent events, especially the physical safety of our children. And one of the things that I want to address is a bullying culture. I was doing a little research for this episode in preparation, and I found some statistics that troubled me. For example, 28% of U.S. students grades 6 through 12 report experiencing bullying. And beyond that, 70% of young people say that they have seen bullying in their schools, even if they haven't experienced it personally. So I think it's safe to say that bullying is a problem. For me personally, bullying was a huge issue as a young person. I was terribly bullied emotionally and physically while I was enrolled in public schooling before I came to Alpine Valley School, which for me, Alpine Valley School was kind of a refuge from that experience. And it was very hard for me to feel safe. School often felt like going into a war zone, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen to me on any given day. And for me, that caused a lot of anxiety and stress. And so the way that we try to deal with this at Alpine Valley School and other schools like us is by empowering the kids, by letting them be the ones who can use the systems, like I spoke about earlier, Judicial Committee, letting them be in a position where they can write up the behavior themselves that violates the laws that we've all set forth. My guest today is Jaime McNear, an Alpine Valley School graduate who also experienced a lot of bullying before she came to Alpine Valley School. In our interview, she talks about how she found a sense of safety, a sense of empowerment in choosing what she wanted to do every day and using the systems that we have in place at school to address issues that otherwise she might have handled in maybe a more unhealthy way. Also, she tells a story about how Alpine Valley School ultimately helped her decide that she was going to go to college, even though she was initially opposed to the idea. So that's kind of an unusual story. Sometimes our students choose not to take that path, but actually Jaime was convinced by Alpine Valley School that she should go to college. So I definitely encourage you to stick around for that part because it's a very cool story. Jaime has a lot of interesting things to share about feeling safe at school, and I know you're going to really enjoy this interview. So without further ado, here's our conversation. Hi, Jaime. Thanks for being on the show.
Hi, thanks for asking me to be on the show.
No worries. Would you start by letting everybody know who you are and kind of your history with Alpine Valley School?
Hi, my name is Jaime McNear. I am about 25 years old. I'm a personal assistant and receptionist. I am engaged, have 2 great fur babies, and have lived in Colorado my whole life.
Awesome. And how old were you when you first started at Alpine Valley School?
11 years old. And nice. I graduated at 18 in 2011.
So what had you and your family been doing for school before you came to AVS?
I started out, like most kids do, in the public school system until I was about in 3rd grade. Then when I was in 3rd grade, there was an educator who worked at my school who was starting a private school for what she called twice exceptional children. If you look up that catchphrase, I'm sure you can still find the old literature on the school. It was called Burdoon, and it was in Lafayette. It was geared toward like kids who were really smart, but also had learning disabilities. So like, maybe you have a high IQ, but you have dyslexia, or maybe you're a really gifted artist, but you're opposite at, terrible at math because of, in my case, I have dyscalculia. I can't really read numbers very well. So it was basically geared for alternative learning, and the school didn't end up being what it was all cracked up to be. The recession kind of started to happen right in the middle of that. So they ended up shutting down. And while we were looking for alternative schooling options, one of the other parents whose kids, obviously didn't want to go back into public schooling, they found AVS and they were like, we don't think this is right for our kid, but this sounds like the kind of thing that you crazy hippies would be into. So they sent it to my mom. And then we started the school, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah. So it seems to me that AVS is pretty different from like a gifted type of organization. Was that kind of a culture shock for you? It was
an extreme culture shock for me, actually. I went from a place where, first of all, there was a lot of bullying. A lot of the kids had emotional problems also that the administration of that school hadn't really prepared for. Or if they had, they didn't do a good enough job, so that was kind of the prevailing issue of why the school got shut down, because they had a lot of psychological and emotional issues they weren't trained to deal with there. But yeah, it was a very weird place. It was cool. It was interesting. But yeah, no, it was, the bullying culture was awful.
So what do you remember about AVS? Like, what was your first impression?
And when I first got to the school, let's see, at 11, I think the first two people I hung out with at the school were Kelsey and Keith Kiernan. And, Kelsey's such an amazing dancer. And she and a couple of the other girls were working on dance routines in the theater. And that was something that I used to do with my friends because I was in like Broadway dance and ballet and stuff like that at my old prep school. And they were the first people that I talked to at AVS. And I was just so excited to meet people who danced all day. It was great. It was really fun for me that first week, getting to know all the different kids at the school, kind of on their own terms and getting for all of them to show me like their different passions. By the end of the week, I was pretty in love with the place, and I actually struck up kind of a friendship with one of the parents. And I convinced, because she was visiting for some reason, and I convinced her to convince my mom to send me to the school, actually, because my parents weren't going to do it. They were actually going to take me in, send me a Jeff Copen or something like that, because they wanted, something that was going to like get me into college. They'd already spent all this money on my prep school education. They wanted me to go to an Ivy League school. And I never wanted that as a kid, ever. And so I just sort of dug my heels in and wouldn't until they listened to me. It was Carol Oliveira, and I convinced her to talk to my parents at the end of week meeting with your mom and Larry that everybody we used to have at the end of their first week. I convinced her to come to that meeting and talk my mom into sending me to the school because I wanted to go so bad.
Yeah. Well, your mom must have gotten it to some extent because you stayed for a long time.
My mom was pretty inclined to trust me at that point because I had such a hard couple of years at that prep school, and my mom's just a really neat parent. She's always been all about like letting me advocate for myself. So whenever I'm willing to speak up, she's always been the kind of parent who will listen, like she's not going to be like, oh, you're just a kid. You know what you're talking about. She's like, this is your life. I'm going to take what you say into account.
Yeah. And so you just knew that AVS was the place for you.
I honestly, to me, and it may sound melodramatic, especially since I was 11, but in my mind, it was life or death. Like either I would go to AVS or I would never go to another school again, and my parents weren't going to drag me out of my room. They couldn't make me do it, I was scared of other kids. I didn't like other kids. So the fact that I made friends so fast at AVS, got people to talk to me and everyone was so nice. It was very different, for me. I was like, I don't want to go to a school. I want to be I want to feel safe more than anything. Yeah. How much freedom we got was definitely a plus because I have always loved to do creative stuff, and having time to do projects and just like sew and draw all day and do whatever I wanted. Yeah, I was excited. My Lord.
Yeah. So it's usually not a hard sell to the kids in the beginning. What did you find that you ended up spending your time on at school? Like what kind of things did you do on a regular basis?
For about the first year, I went through the computer phase that a lot of kids go through. where I spent like a whole year in a room on the computers because, unlimited access, which was very nerve-wracking for my mom. I can tell you that. She was like, when is she ever going to get off the computer and do something with herself? But I was lucky enough to make a group of friends at the school who are all within my age group. And we're all queer femme individuals. And pretty much, for the most part, we're all still pretty close friends. And they kind of pulled me out of my shell more than anything. And I noticed myself, like, starting to just want to hang out with them and to be social and to do stuff with them. So I ended up spending actually a lot of my time off campus. We went to Prospect all the time because Kennedy and I liked to LARP. We were really, really into LARPing. So we did that pretty much for like 3 years straight, just LARPing all the time.
You may need to explain for the noobs what LARPing is.
That's true. Not everybody knows. So we played a live form of D&D. We used different rule books. We used actually White Wolf for a lot of our stuff. And we made some up, but we did live action role playing, which is basically where you do a tabletop role play, but you dress up as your characters and you learn how to fight with fake weapons. And we got Kennedy's stepdad, he's a stage combat instructor. We convinced him to teach us stage combat so that we could like believably pull off our fight scenes and stuff. It was really fun, actually. We spent the majority of our lives at AVS, I think, until we were about 14, just doing that.
So you had the computer phase, you had the going to the park and fighting phase. Awesome. What do you feel like you gained from spending your time in those ways? It's kind of an unconventional adolescence. So do you feel like there were benefits?
Absolutely. I mean, at that point in my life, I had so much just crud shoved in my head that I didn't care about. And the stuff that I didn't know how to do really was like socialize effectively. I mean, I was always a social kid, but I was also like blissfully socially unaware. So like, I would get bullied all the time because I was such a dweeb. But I always wanted to be everybody's friend, And taking away just a sense of community from the way that you grow up, I think is incredibly valuable. I learned a lot of things that I may have been taught in a classroom, but I didn't learn them until I needed them, and I didn't need them until I was living my life, which you start doing when you're not sitting in a classroom 8 to 10 hours a day, having stupid things drilled into your head that you're not going to memorize. I mean, I know that's what everybody comes back to, who's been to ABS, is just like, what can you learn? And even if you do learn it in a classroom, are you going to remember it? Are you going to use it? Is it going to be contextually relevant, So it suited my learning style, and it made any of the education that I'd had before worthwhile, because what's the point of knowing something if you don't get to use it? And I got to, learn things that I cared about and that were relevant to me. And of course, all that was great.
And one of the things you mentioned was that, like, the importance of feeling safe. And what about life at AVS made you feel safe?
Having a lot of self-direction made me feel safe because I was in control of my own fate. Whatever went on at school, I was never in a situation that I didn't put myself in. I was able to confront people in a way that was much healthier than ever before. Our JC and our judicial system was a huge boon for me as a kid, especially since I was obsessed with law. 2 of my family members are lawyers, and for a while that was my thing, especially when it was all, you should, go to Yale or whatever. You have such high test scores. And I'm like, I'm 8. I don't want to do that. I don't even want to go to college. I hate the idea of going to college. That was the funniest thing, actually. The biggest thing the AVS gave me was the desire to go to college. Because I actually didn't want to go. Simply because in my brain as a kid, I was like, I have 12 years of public education and then I'm free. And how dare you make me go for another 4 years to do something boring that I hate. But by the time I left AVS, it was like, no, college can be fun. Like, of course it can be fun. Like, I'm not exhausted from this. I'm not tired of this. I'm not bored of this. It was a way more unique experience also, knowing how to talk to adults. That's another thing I learned at AVS, how to talk to adults, because that's something that they don't teach you in public school and that you don't learn because the only people around you are authority figures. So you only learn how to talk to authority figures and not like other adults or even other human beings like they're human beings. So yeah, it was really advantageous going into college knowing how to talk to adults. Because I was able to talk to my professors. I was able to learn so much more because I wasn't afraid of adults because of that safety that I had growing up. And because, in JC, we could write up whoever we wanted. It didn't matter who did wrong. Everybody was held to the same standard, and having that safety and feeling like truly an equal was extremely advantageous just to my development as a person.
And it sounds like there was a level of empowerment too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you weren't burned out on school, so you went to college. How was that experience?
I loved college, and if college was free, I'd probably do college for the rest of my life because I love the community of college so much. I love the clubs. I love the activities. I love job fairs. I love professors. I love somebody who doesn't get paid enough, but who's passionate enough about their subject to stand there and try and make community college students care about it. I also specifically chose to go to community college because I think it's a lot more similar to AVS, actually. I think there's a lot more of a choose your own adventure in community college, and there's not as much bureaucracy, and a lot of the administration and everybody you're working with is a little bit closer to you in age. And I feel like maybe it's not like a higher learning environment in the way that, people would think of an Ivy League school, but I think it has a higher education value because of the social aspect and the ability for, people in other economic circumstances, other than rich to really, make a community and come from all kinds of different places and to meet each other, in a place where everybody's equals.
How was that transition? I think a lot of people assume that because you're coming from Alpine Valley School and you don't have a lot of structure, that going into a college environment where there is structure is not something that we can do. Like, we can't make that mental transition. How was that for you?
I've never really truly been a structured person. I probably never will be. But you know what? It doesn't actually take that much structure for someone to tell you, like, they tell you everything you're supposed to do in college, like right up front, and if you can't do it, you don't. But they explain it to you, it's not like you walk in and they're like, oh, this is going to be just like high school. Like, they explain to every single person that walks through college how college works while you're in it. So it's like anyone could go to college without any kind of educational background leading up to it. That's my personal opinion on it. So I think that the criticism, like the idea that like structure is something that you have to even consider when you're doing your education. And of course it makes it easier. Of course, having and living a structured life and being used to that, of course that's easy. But like, I had a great seat of my pants the whole time. And you know what? It was amazing. So it's like, you do you. But I don't think that structure has anything to do with college.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Shifting gears just a little bit, if you can think back to kind of when you were starting at AVS, and if you were to talk to somebody now who like had just enrolled this week, let's say, what advice would you give them, like as they're just starting out this journey that might improve the experience?
Don't be so afraid to ask questions and ask for help and ask for guidance. Because the one thing that I was really frustrated with, because in a traditional high school environment, they give you like a guidance counselor and they tell you what to do. And while the experience of having to do it myself, ended up being really valuable, at the time, there were moments when it was really frustrating because there was just certain resources that everybody else had that I didn't necessarily. But that didn't mean that I couldn't have gotten those resources. It's just that, like, it was a personal failing on my part, growing up, to not take that into consideration. Ask questions, ask for advice. Whether or not you take it is up to you, but always ask, because it's like the more resources that you have and the more tools in your toolbox as a human being, the better. And that's something that you should think of in a self-care way, I think. Just, as you start to reach maturity, any piece of advice I could give to any human being is ask questions, more questions, and let people help you. Because people always are offering to help. We always, a lot of times people say no, just like off the hand or off cuff or out of impulse or because they don't want to be a burden. But if someone's offering to help you, take it, for crying out loud, like do yourself a favor.
Yeah, I think most people want to help, even if they may not know how to. So you get to help people to help you, right?
Yeah, either way, it's a learning experience. So just, open yourself up a little more to people. I think I was a little defensive throughout my educational experience because I didn't like being told that I was wrong or that I didn't know something, because it's like when you're criticized a lot as a kid or when you're bullied a lot and then people criticize you, it's really hard to like turn off that defensive response. But if you can, you should, because you'll do yourself a lot more favors that way.
And hopefully it sounds like feeling that sense of safety at AVS allowed you to do that eventually.
Eventually, yeah. It was a process, but so is everything.
So do you have a favorite memory from your time at AVS?
Oh, a favorite memory. God, it's kind of hard to pick just one. Funny enough, as much as I complained about it at the time, for 3 years in a row at AVS, I was the only person on yearbook committee because nobody else wanted to deal with it. And I wouldn't let us not have a yearbook. So I taught myself Adobe InDesign with the help of Audrey. Not Audrey. Sorry, I work with an Audrey. Aubrey Suter. Aubrey taught me how to use InDesign and Photoshop and everything like that before she graduated. And it's not only was a great memory working on the yearbook, because I would force my friends to sit in there with me for a couple weeks at a time every year. And we'd listen to music and I'd swear at the ancient computer and everything would be great. But it ended up being like a huge life skill because, my God, there are so many people out there who don't know how to use Adobe Photoshop and will pay you a ridiculous amount of money because you do.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, that's a good memory. And I'm glad that we have yearbooks from all those years that you were in charge of it.
Thanks. I had so much fun. I love the yearbook. It's fun getting to do it now, too, and get paid for it. I'm like, wow, so this is what they mean about teaching yourself marketable skills.
That's wonderful. Well, Jaime, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today and sharing your story.
Oh, well, thanks for reaching out and chatting with me.
Once again, that was Jaime McNear, Alpine Valley School graduate. If you want to get in touch with Jaime to share your feedback or if you have any questions, her email is McNear, MCNEAR .jay@gmail.com. Thanks again, Jaime, for sharing your story. This is episode 21 of the Alpine Valley School podcast. You can find show notes for this episode at alpinevalleySchool.com/podcast/EP21 for episode 21. If you want to get in touch with the show, send in your own question, perhaps, or you could even record an audio file and send that to us. You can reach us via email at podcast@alpinevalleySchool.com, or you can find us on social media at Alpine Valley School on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Mark Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks with more stories of real learning for real life.